Hello there, so I'm disappointed. You see, I know you. You're not who you say you are. You're watching a mapping video, but in reality, you're not even a mapper. Well, actually, I've known that most of my audience doesn't map for a while now, which I think is a shame. According to a couple polls, there's a sizable portion of players interested in mapping who just haven't given it a proper go, and listening to me talk about mapping all the time might be a good indicator that you are part of that category as well. I just sat down for a few hours and tried mapping since I felt like I got a good grasp of it, but I couldn't do anything really. The sentiment in this guy's comment might hit home for a lot of you. If you're someone who's placed a few objects in the editor, someone who's completed a few low-quality maps, or someone who lands in between, you may have tried and given up on mapping because you weren't satisfied with what you could create. That's probably why I'm asked so often to make videos literally of me just mapping a song. Aspiring mappers may want to see the actual process of mapping and what about it they're neglecting, which leads to dissatisfaction. So, can you make a video on how you start a map / your workflow? Yes I can. This is what mapping looks like. Sporadically repeating the same half second of a song while arranging objects at a frustratingly slow pace. It's as annoying to listen to as it is to watch, but for the guy mapping, me in this case, it's necessary. This is a painful viewing experience because my general approach towards mapping consists of 3 factors, all of which are being managed at essentially the same time in this clip. Comprehending part of the song, visualizing how it can be mapped, and translating that to the timeline and playfield. Sounds a little too vague, I know, so to explain what I mean, let's take a look at a practical example. Treat this like a test of sorts. I want you to listen to this, but actually think on your own for once. Try to recognize all the details of the song in this 2.5 second segment to the best of your ability. Think about what instruments are being played, what sorts of rhythms they're producing, how their intensity changes, really everything discernible about the song. Try to take note of it. And again at 50% playback, just so you definitely hear for yourself what's going on. Compare what you noticed about the song here to what I consider worth thinking of as a mapper. From the top, this segment starts with an impactful held note on the first beat. I don't care what instruments are playing or what pitches are producing, just that the sound is loud and lasts until the next major downbeat, where it repeats again until the following major downbeat. The second white tick here introduces 2 more instruments, which seem to be the focus here. There's a trumpet, which increases in volume and pitch with each sound while playing on each white tick, and a snare drum, which increases only in volume while playing on each white and red tick. There's also some vocal syllables starting on the 4th white tick, but I don't find them too important. At the start of the next major downbeat, the trumpet plays its final note, and the snare drum transitions into a rhythm twice as fast as earlier, while still increasing volume steadily. That continues until the end of the segment, but right here, a new instrument pops up, the piano, which does this sort of thing. There's probably a name for it, I don't know what it is though. And at the same time, all the background instruments making up that impactful held note increase in volume steadily, making for a climax of all sounds at the end of the 2.5 second segment. So yeah, as you can see, there's a lot to interpret here, more than what I pointed out for sure. Other mappers could easily take something else away from the song, but this is what I personally found to stand out the most, and it's therefore what I would express when creating a map. An increase in rhythm density and intensification of object placements to reflect the song's individual sounds and its general levels of intensity. Observing and remembering all of this is what I consider that first factor, comprehending the song, something you will get better at the more of it you do. Taking a step back now, why are we looking at only 2 seconds of the song again? It's because if I tried to cover more ground, I wouldn't be able to easily remember everything notable about the music here, and I therefore wouldn't be able to manage the next factor, visualizing how it can be mapped. By only focusing on this segment, I can easily memorize what rhythms I think fit best, and how those objects can form a pattern on the playfield reflective of the music. Here is where the practical part of the example comes in. This is real. What you're looking at right now isn't doctored for the sake of explanation in this video at all. I recorded myself mapping this TV-sized song from start to finish in a couple hours, and what you're about to focus on is just a small portion of it covering that 2-second segment of the song we've been talking about so far. This is my mapping workflow. And that's it. Really, that's it. In what you just watched, I analyzed the song in the way we just went over, while visualizing what rhythms and slider velocities would fit accordingly, and how object arrangements could further support that, aka what the timeline and playfield will look like. And I'm guessing that didn't explain anything, so let's go over it in detail. My silly-looking cursor movements show this whole thought process surprisingly well. When playing through the beginning of this section, most of my focus was going towards listening to the song, so I barely moved the cursor at all. Once I understood the first rhythms I was going to use, a circle for the strong sound and half-beat sliders for the trumpet/snare drum stuff, I placed that circle and started to think about movement. I could tell the song was building up intensity, and so I thought about one of the many patterns to express that, progressively moving from the left side of the screen to the right, with gradually increasing spacing and slider velocity. That's why I moved my cursor up and down like this. I was imagining vertical half-beat sliders progressively going from left to right. I then listened to the measure after the big white tick here and imagined how well that same movement would work with 1/4 sliders, which would be expressing the increased frequency of snare drum hits. After comprehending a bit more of the song, namely the piano introduction, I realized it may be better to differentiate the bits before and after that point through both rhythm and movement. My cursor movements starting from the drum roll were slow, then sped up after the piano sound. This is because I imagined a stream for the first bit, then progressively expanding 1/4 sliders for the second bit, whose spacing could better reflect the massive climax. So at this point, I had a basic blueprint for how the section would turn out. Start with a circle, go to half-beat sliders, a stream, then 1/4 sliders, all going from left to right with increasing slider velocity and spacing. A reasonable idea that's thought out well enough, I think, but it's not like the image in my mind was 100% clear. Putting pen to paper or circle to grid showed my blueprint's flaws. I started by placing green lines which gradually bumped up slider velocity to show the song's general increase in intensity here, sort of. It increases twice, split between the stream I had planned. Next came placing those half-beat sliders which, thanks to the SV changes, naturally allowed for an increase in spacing when arranged near each other. I then tried making that stream which wasn't as clearly visible in my mind as those sliders. The first one I tried didn't really allow me to continue the progressive left to right buildup, so I deleted it and tried again. With a less sharp curve, I thought this one might have worked, but spacing was clearly too large to maintain the visual pattern with these other blue sliders, meaning gone again. With lower spacing though, I was able to achieve the stream I wanted, after which I slightly modified SV changes to be more gradual and drew some 1/4 sliders in the same fashion as the previous 1/2 sliders, parallel and gradually increasing spacing. In my mind, this was what I was aiming for, but seeing it live just wasn't working for me. It technically expressed the song fine, it just felt, I don't know, not as climactic as I'd expected, and so I adapted by enlarging spacing and fanning slider bodies outward. To me, it felt more representative of the song with these changes, and after increasing spacing a bit more to account for the following objects, this was how the section of the map turned out. So yeah, we did it. That should cover my mapping workflow well enough. Listen to the song, visualize how objects can represent that, turn that mental image into reality, and adapt along the way to make up for its flaws. The process I just spent the last 8 minutes explaining for this small section applies to everything I've done in this whole map, and essentially every other map I've created as well. While this may be how I and most other mappers have grown accustomed to mapping, I don't want you to think it's the only way. I know some mappers who focus on large-scale planning, like they start by going through an empty map, placing bookmarks and slider velocity changes as a sort of outline for how intensity will be expressed. And there's other mappers who only concern themselves with rhythm choice first. Once they have rhythm for an entire map under control, they loop around to the beginning and arrange their objects in neat patterns. Both of these are just examples of some ways mappers divide up the mapping process, which may actually be more effective for new mappers who easily get overwhelmed by handling everything at once. Does knowing how I or anyone else creates their maps mean you'll be an MLG pro mapper right away though? No, of course not. You might have already known everything about my preferred way of mapping by just watching a mapping livestream or asking someone else, or really, even through common sense. Still though, it's not easy for new mappers to manage, and I think that's because new mappers struggle the most with that second step, generating a mental image for how a specific part of a song could be mapped. If I didn't have a mental image for how to map something, I would probably be in the same shoes as this guy. I would map for hours, but not be able to to do anything really. Being able to visualize rhythms and object placements in response to hearing a bit of music is something that takes time to develop. I could only form an idea for this section in a couple seconds because I've had enough experiences with similar pieces of music and I've seen how other mappers handled them as well. Things that new mappers probably haven't thought about nearly as much. Which is why I'll actually do what everyone's been asking me to do for so long. I know that I can't possibly teach people what kinds of rhythms or patterns are decent for every song and every map, but I can at least give them a sample to work from. I've made, finally, a video of me live commentating my mapping choices. It's repetitive and boring, definitely, but hearing parts of a song and knowing the process by which I interpret them into objects might be exactly what you, someone interested in starting to map, are looking for. Or, you know, it's something to listen to in the background. Your choice. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. I should have mentioned that this is the 2011 version of the editor. Looks kinda weird, and there was a reason I was doing it, but I'll talk about that some other time. While I'm here though, I might as well say that next week's video will mark 1 full year of making these weekly mapping videos. It's gonna be a long video. Really long.